is one factor, that these incidents have taken place, and there's a kind of a movement in the far-right AfD, which has always made migration to be its big issue, essentially saying, told you so, look what's happening. And then in the centre-right party, the Conservatives, who we've just been hearing about from Michaela, feeling under pressure that they need to kind of get on top of this issue and not hemorrhage votes to the AfD. And so this in part led to what Friedrich Merz did, which Michaela was talking about, and that we were just also discussing here, that he kind of made a gambit in Parliament a couple of weeks ago to try to bring forward a motion, to try to prove that I'm the guy who will take care of this if I win the election next month. And look, I'm prepared to take political risks for that. And we'll see tonight if that paid off. But the AfD is certainly strong. And I think that points to the other level here, which is not necessarily just these incidents, but the fact that in Germany there has been a very long period, 10 plus years now, of a very high net migration. So the figures, I think, for the last full decade that we have, which goes up to and including the year 2023, net immigration of 6.6 million or so. And I think this is one thing that has really contributed to the growth of the AfD during this period. There are multiple factors, but this is certainly one of them. And their point is trying to say, this is too much. We have to stop this. Yeah?
We've had a question in the chat. Someone is asking, and maybe we can apply this question to the topic of migration. They're asking, what will happen if the CDU wins this election? And Marcus, I'm interested to bring you in here because individual parties have, I guess, had to adopt a tougher stance towards migration as a result of these attacks. What are the CDU's policies and what type of stance has it adopted in recent weeks on migration?
Yeah, it definitely has a more stricter approach on the topic of migration. And just to pick up actually what Richard just said, I mean, I think there are two schools of thought here in Germany. The one is saying, well, okay, let's not touch that issue because it makes the AfD stronger. So just talk about it, but not too much. And then there's the other school saying, well, we have to get this topic back from the AfD. We have to own it as CDU or as any other party. And I think Friedrich Merz understood that as long as this migration topic, which made the AfD strong, as long as it's sits in the hand of the AfD, the AfD will be a strong party unless we get the migration problem solved, which is not something you can do overnight. So in a sense, I understand what his reasoning was when he was put this motion actually to Parliament, and when he was saying in the beginning, well, I don't care who's voting for it, I just want this to be on the table and to get it done. He probably did not reckon that the backlash would be so tremendous. But let's put that aside for a second. I think the main question is, can we get rid, or can we somehow solve the problem of migration? Can we control it? Can we get back control on this topic by just continuing what we did so far, or do we have to change course?
Well, let's talk about that further. Let's look at the growth in support for the far right, because, of course, large numbers of voters are turning to the Alternative for Germany party, the AfD. Now, in the latest opinion polling, the AfD would take 21% of the vote this election, and that would make them the second biggest party in Parliament in the Bundestag. Now, that is also double the party's result from the last election in 2021, when they got just over 10% of the vote. Now, according to a recent YouGov survey, the AfD is predicted to win the highest share of the vote in 5 of Germany's 16 states, all of them in the former communist East Germany. Now, areas in darker blue on this map that you can see show where the AfD support is expected to be strongest based on the polling. That's highlighting a clear east-west divide. Now, the Alternative for Germany, or AfD's pick for Chancellor, is Alice Weidel, although she's highly unlikely to get the job because other parties say that they won't work with her far-right group. 46-year-old Weidel is the party's co-leader. She has a doctorate in economics, and as a politician, she's known for her anti-immigration rhetoric. Weidel and the AfD have put migration at the heart of their programme, pledging to carry out mass deportations and overhaul asylum law. They want Germany to abolish the euro, reintroduce the Deutschmark and potentially leave the European Union. They have pledged to lift sanctions imposed on Russia and start importing Russian gas once again. Now, the election campaign has also seen close associates of Donald Trump openly campaigning for the far-right AfD. Elon Musk, the world's richest man, appeared at an AfD rally in the eastern German city of Halle via video call. Musk also hosted the party's chancellor candidate, Alice Weidel, on his social media platform X. Musk has repeatedly said, only the AfD can save Germany. And we're going to cross now to the AfD party headquarters and speak to our political correspondent there, Matthew Moore. So, Matthew, give us a sense, first of all, of what's going on there at the headquarters. How are people feeling? What's the atmosphere like there?
The room behind me is filling up as we get that ever closer to 6 p.m. and there's a real sense of excitement here, of anticipation, because they believe they are on course. The AfD is on course for a historic night, that they will have plenty of reason to cheer and to celebrate as the night goes on. And that's because, as we heard, they are on par, according to the polls, to finish second, which would be the first time that a party out with the Social Democrats or the Christian Democrats has finished first and second place in a German election in post-war history. It would also be the AfD's best result ever, and so there is a real sense of anticipation and excitement here. But interestingly, outside there's a huge police presence around this party campaign event tonight, and there's also protests, as we've seen. In recent weeks, there's been protests across Germany about this, about the people that care and worried about the AfD's success. And we've seen about 100 protesters who have made their way to as close as they could get to this party event tonight. But the police, there's a huge police presence, as I say, that's keeping basically anyone who doesn't have accreditation and a right to be at the party event from keeping them from far away as possible to avoid any sort of conflict, because the AfD is such a polarising party.
And yet, as we've been saying, the polls are suggesting the AfD could get at least 20% of the vote. Talk to us about what attracts people to the AfD. What is their appeal?
So, the AfD has really benefited from a number of events in recent years. What's interesting for viewers is that the last time that Germans went to the polls was in 2021, and the AfD actually did badly by its standards. It lost some support. But since then, Russia has invaded Ukraine. That has impacted Germany hugely, because we've seen an energy crisis here. We've seen the economy has been hit. And we've seen also migration, as the issue of migration has come right back into the forefront of voters' minds. And that's because the numbers of people arriving in Germany every year has grown. And the issue has become, if you ask people in polls, it's become one of the number one issues, if not the number one. It depends. And so this kind of mix of issues has really come together to benefit the AfD, because they've sold themselves as the only party that's offering an alternative to the mainstream policies on this, and so it's a lot of grievance politics, which has been really successful in getting people to come out and vote for them, as we saw last year in 3 state elections in the east of Germany. The AfD managed their best results ever, and there's a real sense of momentum behind this party, because they're tapping into this sense of frustration over all of those issues: the war in Ukraine, the economy and migration.
Yeah, a real sense of momentum. Matthew, thank you so much. We're going to come back to you a bit later. That's Matthew Moore joining us from the AfD headquarters. Marcus, if I could ask you, we've touched a little on it before, but even if the AfD does come out as the second strongest party, which is looking very likely, it is very unlikely to be part of the next government. Can you talk to us about this so-called firewall that we hear a lot about here in German politics?
Yeah, well, the firewall is basically saying that there is no cooperation with the AfD whatsoever. And as I pointed out earlier, I mean, it's about once we normalize the AfD by talking to them, by doing cooperations with them, we kind of make it easier for people to vote for them. No, I think we have to rethink that firewall notion, because if the AfD comes out strongly, which the polls indicate, then we probably have to think, okay, what's happening here? It's probably not only migration. This is sure one of the big issues, but it's more than that. It's an anti-establishment notion that's also associated with the AfD. It has to do with the sympathies for Russia. There's some GDR nostalgia at play, and definitely I think they're taking some pleasure in disruption. So, I mean, we're talking a lot about disruption in the United States. You know, I was at the Munich Security Conference, and I was witnessing when J.D. Vance was talking about what Germany should do, or Europe should be doing. They take pleasure in that. They believe that they are the party to kind of shake up the whole place and to, restructure a system that has been kind of bureaucratized in a sense.
We're getting a lot of interest about the AfD in the YouTube chat, so if you do have any questions about that, please do put them in and I'll do my best to bring it here. Richard, if I can come to you, we've just heard reasons as to why the AfD is politically isolated. Many people would argue that doing so, this so-called firewall, is an undemocratic thing. People like Elon Musk and J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, argued that at the Munich Security Conference. What are your thoughts on this notion that the firewall is not a democratic measure to which to keep the AfD out? Yeah, so I mean, we should probably kind of go a bit deeper on that speech that J.D. Vance made. Yeah, I was also at the Munich Security Conference, and you know, it was really the bombshell event of the weekend. Everybody was talking about it the whole weekend. Everybody had expected him to give a speech about the Ukraine war and the Trump administration's attempts to end that war, which is in itself seen as very controversial in Europe. And the Europeans were kind of bracing to get told you have to do a lot more for your defense. So they were kind of ready for that because they know that basically that's right, what the Trump administration is saying there. But the fact that his speech was really absolutely almost entirely focused instead on an attack on Europe for what J.D. Vance portrayed as low standards of free speech, you know, censorship online, on social media, and an attitude to populist parties, and his implication being very strong that he was talking about the AfD, that is kind of you know, freezing people out and taking an arrogant attitude to people who are voting for a legitimate party. And I think, I mean, this caused a huge reaction among German politicians who really felt you know, what an affront to kind of intervene in German politics. But I think if you talk to Republicans in the US, I mean, they would say, sorry, Europeans have been looking down their noses at the Republican Party, especially under Donald Trump, for years now, and kind of sneering at him and the MAGA movement. Well, this is what it feels like, you know? But it was still a really quite extraordinary intervention by J.D. Vance into German politics. But it does shine a light on an issue, and I think what basically Marcus is talking about there, that if that party keeps growing, well, at some point it becomes impossible to have a firewall around it, because you start to, you know, there are scenarios, perhaps in the next election, 2029, where it might be impossible potentially to form a coalition government, either without them at least giving their passive agreement, you know. So all of the centrist parties, if we put it that way, are kind of grappling with this issue of, or this question of what comes next with this party. But Friedrich Merz sort of had, you know, slightly sort of dipped his toe over this question with bringing a motion into Parliament, which was then, it was not coordinated with the AfD. He even put lines in the motion deliberately, kind of poison pills in the motion to try to you know, put them off voting. The lines which actually criticised the AfD, and the AfD said, well, we don't care about that. We're going to vote for it if we think it's the right thing to do. So it's going to be, it really is, I think in the next 4 years, it's going to be a major question. How sustainable is this firewall? What is the nature of it? Is it only against coalition, or can there be some sort of tacit cooperation? And it's not just a question on a federal level, it's also a question on a regional level. And in some regions, particularly in Eastern Germany, the AfD is even stronger. So yeah, it's going to be potentially a big question going forward.
And especially finally, I would just add, if what emerges from this election is an unhappy coalition again, with the Conservatives in coalition, say with the Social Democrats and with the Greens, so the Conservatives in charge, but across the kind of ideological aisle to progressives on the other side, you can expect more and more Conservatives to start saying, guys, this is ridiculous. The AfD are farther to the right of us. Well, okay, let's try and bring them in a bit, bring them closer to us, and have a more kind of centre-right coalition.
And the AfD also have their eye on the next election, don't they?
So we produced a documentary about the AfD and their foreign policy last autumn, and we did an interview with Alice Weidel. We asked her, do you think you're going to be Chancellor? Do you think you're going to be in government? And she said, it's too early to be talking about Chancellor, but, I wouldn't rule us out having an involvement in government on the federal level from the year 2029. So they know they're playing a long game. They know that they're not going to get in this time. But, depending on how this parliament ends up, the AfD may end up in a pretty good position for them as being, the prime opposition to a government that they would describe as being a sham and something that is only kind of continuing the dysfunction that we saw towards the end of the previous government. And that could put them in a very strong position in 2029.
We're getting lots of questions about the AfD, so we will come back to those. So just so that you are aware, if you're writing in your questions, we will get to them a little bit later. But thank you very much, and please do keep them coming in.
That's right. Just a quick reminder to our viewers, this is special coverage on DW about the German election. People in Germany went to the polls today. They went to vote today. The first results, the exit polls, are expected in about 20 minutes. We'll be bringing those to you, of course, as soon as we get them. And we're talking about all of the issues that are on voters' minds, that are helping them decide which political party to vote for. And of course, the economy is a major concern for voters. Germany's economy is faltering, and it's not just ordinary people who are worried. Last month, Germany's biggest business associations sounded the alarm. They said fixing the economy has got to be the next government's top priority. The business leaders said short-term crisis management will not help Germany. We need fundamental structural changes in economic and social policy. So let's take a closer look at some graphics that highlight the main issues that people are talking about here. The first is the fact that Germany's economy has stopped growing. It is in recession. As you can see here, economic output has been contracting for the last 2 years. That, of course, is not good news for Europe's biggest economy. And these economic headwinds are all having an impact on the cost of living in Germany. It's a huge issue for voters. Take a look at the rate of inflation. That has been falling since the shock of the energy crisis in 2022, which was sparked by the war in Ukraine. But inflation remained elevated last year at 2.2%. Now, the economy is one reason why voters are expected to turn their backs on the current Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. Scholz has been in office since 2021. He is, of course, seeking re-election. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, he cut many ties with Moscow, notably ending all direct imports of Russian natural gas. Now, late last year, Scholz effectively brought down his own coalition by firing his finance minister, Christian Lindner. Scholz and his SPD party are telling voters that they will kickstart investment and the economy through borrowing, which could include suspending constitutional limits on new debt. He wants to step up support for Ukraine, and he wants to raise the minimum wage to 15 euros an hour. And we're going to get some more information about Olaf Scholz and his party by speaking to DW's chief political correspondent, Nina Hase, who joins us now from the SPD headquarters. Nina, Scholz is seen by many, isn't he, as going into this election as a failed chancellor. So just sum up for us, where did he go wrong?
Olaf Scholz will go down in history as the least popular Chancellor in post-war Germany, and that is quite a big title. Now, there are, of course, as always, a number of reasons. One has to do with his personality. He's not seen as a people pleaser. He had this nickname, Scholzomat, for a long time, so robot-like, and he's tried to bring out this side in him in recent weeks, but whether that was too late is a question that people will debate afterwards. Now, then, he was at the helm of a three-way coalition, and that is never easy. The political parties here in this country have a very strong say in what the government can and cannot do, and Scholz was not perceived as being a strong enough leader to stop some of the infighting that was going on between his junior partners from the Greens and the Liberal FDP party. He waited too long, many people said, before they made these crucial decisions. You have to remember that Scholz took over as Chancellor just weeks before Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and this government had set out on a progressive, on a liberal agenda, and very quickly they had to find ways of financing drastic new measures to deal with the consequences of Russia's war here in this country. Also, he has not been able to ring through to voters with his issues, social justice, etc., and he's also not managed to convince voters that the challenges that come from migration are really the ones that he takes so seriously that he's willing to make drastic new steps. Having said all that, also when it comes to support of Ukraine, he's dealing with a political party that has a very big variety of opinions, from delivering Taurus cruise missiles instantly and now to essentially not sending more weapons. You've got everything in this very, very interesting political party here.
So, Nina, the polls are showing the SPD could get around 16%. What's the feeling there at the SPD headquarters? I mean, do they feel that Scholz has a political future? I mean, what's the future looking like for the SPD?
Well, it is definitely a tragic day for the Social Democrats. We are talking about Germany's oldest party. It goes back to the 19th century. So they are going to probably see their worst result in post-war Germany. This is not to be underestimated. And of course, there are going to be voices who are going to call for consequences. And what's important is to remember that the SPD have their eyes on that 20% mark. So if they get beyond 20%, they're saying that Olaf Scholz can play a role still in the next constellations. The SPD might still enter a new government then as a junior partner. But if they don't crack that 20%, then there will be loud voices from the base of the SPD calling for proper consequences, calling also for party leadership to take responsibility and make way for a new generation. But when you talk to people, it's very unclear who those new people can be. What is definitely true is that the SPD is probably going to experience one of its darkest days in history.
Nina Hase at the SPD headquarters. Nina, we'll be back to you later, but thanks so much for now. So, Richard, we heard Nina there talking about, you know, they're hopeful of 20%, you know, whether it's 15, whether it's 20, there is a good chance, isn't there, that the SPD could be a partner in the next government, potentially in an alliance with the CDU.
Yeah, and this is one of the funny things about German politics, right? I mean, the SPD looks like it could be the biggest loser of tonight. If these polls have been anything to go by, they're probably going to go down from the mid-20s to the mid-teens. That's a big collapse. And especially for a party that used to be able to get 40%, you know, in previous decades. So one of the main stories of the last 20 years has been the gradual step-by-step weakening of the SPD, of the Social Democrats. They managed a surprise victory at the last election in 2021. But even that was on only mid-20s%. I mean, that's not, you know, it's not a huge chunk of the population, is it? But the thing that really struck me recently is that the SPD, they're almost like the permanent party of government in Germany in the last generation. I mean, if you think about, like, what has really defined German politics in the last 20 years, most people probably say Angela Merkel, yeah, because everybody knows her. Well, she was in power for 16 years. the Social Democrats have been in power for 23 out of the last 27 years.
23 out of the last 27 years.
So since 1998, they have either been, so they had two coalitions where they were in charge, and then they had several so-called grand coalitions where they were under Angela Merkel, and then this coalition too. So they've only been out of power for 4 out of the last 27 years. So if they get back into government again, that's going to go. That's going to keep going further. So this is one of the quirks of the German system, that sometimes there are parties that almost end up automatically getting into government because you just need them to create a majority in parliament.
Marcus, we've just heard Richard talk about Angela Merkel, and Olaf Scholz was elected really, he became Chancellor really kind of as a continuity of Angela Merkel. And that worked for him 3.5 years ago, but it hasn't worked in the years since then. What do you think went wrong for him?
Yeah, he was the finance minister under Angela Merkel, and his reputation was to be kind of a solid technocrat who knows his stuff. And this actually helped him getting into office. Also, I think the CDU at the time had a very weak candidate in Armin Laschet in 2021, so that also helped him. Otherwise, I think he would never have been ended up as Chancellor.
Right.
However, I think in the beginning he did a good job in navigating the country through the repercussions of the beginning of the Ukraine war. And we all remember that the main concern at the time was, okay, how do we deal with the energy crunch, and how can we get rid of the dependency getting energy from Russia, and how can we compensate this by buying American LNG, liquid gas, for instance. So this is something I think Scholz and his government did very well. But then in the second half, actually, of the past 3 years, things went downwards. And why? Because it became clear that there were 3 very different approaches to how to govern. Right. And while the Social Democrats are very much in favor of social engineering and distributing money to certain groups, the Greens are kind of ideological when it comes to climate change and to change the whole economy into a green economy. And then, of course, you had the liberals, who were staunch fiscal conservatives, who are not happy with either of them. So in a way, he ended up being the head of a government which was very diverse. And I think that's something he did not foresee to happen.
All right, we're going to talk about somebody else who's been part of this last government, which is Robert Habeck. He is the Greens party candidate for Chancellor. The last government was a coalition between the SPD, the Greens and the FDP. Now, the 55-year-old Green party leader has been Vice-Chancellor and Economy Minister in the governing coalition since 2021, and he led a move away from Russian gas after the invasion of Ukraine. He is seen as a pragmatic politician. Now, Habeck and the Greens have promised to introduce a so-called billionaires tax to help poorer families. The Greens have also pledged to increase spending on defence and military aid to Ukraine. They want to reform what's called the debt brake, which limits new state borrowing here in Germany. And to find out more about their agenda, what they have planned, we can speak to DW political correspondent Julia Saudelli, who joins us now from the Green Party headquarters. So, Julia, give us a sense of what's going on there. I mean, is there a feeling that Germany has somehow lost interest in climate and the environment, which obviously underpins the Green Party?
Yeah, we've just seen this venue behind me filling up, and we've just seen Robert Habeck, their chancellor candidate, and Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister, and also one of their main candidates, come on stage and thank their supporters, thank the people who contributed to this election campaign. An election campaign, as you said, that hasn't really seen... also not really been accepted that well by the population. And maybe some of the thinking with the Greens was that they not necessarily want to bring the issue to the forefront because they thought it would not necessarily help them with voters.
So, Julia, the Greens are looking at around 14%. That's what the polls are suggesting. The Greens' Robert Habeck does enjoy strong support, though, doesn't he? Despite the party's quite poor polling, he's quite popular. So what is it about him that people like?
Well, we have seen Habeck being one of the most popular chancellor candidates among voters. He was #1 for quite a while, though he's recently been surpassed by Friedrich Merz of the conservative CDU. And I would say he is a politician that is approachable. He is someone who has centered a lot of his campaign now on speaking to people at their kitchen table. He wants to show that he is someone who speaks directly with voters, someone who listens to their concerns. And that is something that possibly resonates with voters. At the same time, in his role as economy and climate minister, he has had to take some tough decisions. He was the one who had to deal with Germany's energy crisis and basically no more Russian gas coming into Germany. And this is something that he did manage to carry out, but that also brought quite some tough times to Germans. It brought inflation, it brought higher energy costs. And so, yes, he might be popular in some polls, but he also had a difficult role, and he also did have a lot of debate and a lot of voters' opinions actually going against him. And he was also strongly attacked by other parties like the Conservatives, but also by the AfD.
Julia Sadelli at the Greens headquarters. Julia, thank you so much for now. We'll see you again a bit later. So, Richard, I wanted to ask you, as Julia was talking about there, climate didn't really feature in this election, did it? It was one of the big issues in the last election. This time, as we've been saying, you know, it's all about the economy, about security and migration. So what appeal does the Green Party still have, and how could they, I mean, they could potentially be in the next coalition government. What could they bring to it?
Yeah, so, I mean, the Green Party, it does look like they're going to, I mean, according to the polls, it looks like they'll suffer at least some losses since last time. But nothing like the collapse that, say, the Social Democrats have, nothing like the collapse that the Social Democrats have suffered. So that does suggest that their kind of core voters have become a pretty loyal group, yeah? Maybe partly because they see the Greens as really being the last party that really makes a priority out of climate change. Not that that's necessarily, as we just heard, it hasn't been a massive issue this year, but you know, really recognizing that as the kind of biggest meta threat to the world right now. But the Greens have done, one thing that's interesting about the Greens is they've made a real move into becoming seen as, you know, quite militarily and in terms of security, quite a hawkish party with respect to the Ukraine war, also with respect to attitudes to China. And this is partly because, you know, they have a belief in international law. They see the invasion of Ukraine as illegal. They have a belief in human rights. Of course, they point to the you know, abuses that have been taking place in Ukraine. And that has, you know, had the effect of positioning themselves as a party that's very strongly in support of Ukraine, in support of sending more weapons to Ukraine. And this is quite a jolt for a lot of their supporters because they have their roots in the sort of peace movement in 1980s. You know, they were a party that actually wanted to get rid of NATO. Now they're saying that we need to strengthen NATO. So it's been on quite a political journey, the Green Party. But yeah, I think they'll count among the losers of tonight, but it looks like less of a loser than many of the other parties.
All right. Just a reminder to our viewers, we are getting to the point, probably about 5 minutes to go, that we will get those exit polls and get a sense of who Germany has voted for. But we're going to talk about Germany's foreign policy challenges first. And one of the biggest, of course, is Donald Trump's return as US president. Now, if we think back a few years, relations between Trump and Angela Merkel during Trump's first term were famously frosty. You might remember when Trump hosted the then Chancellor at the White House in 2017, and he refused to shake her hand on camera despite journalists' prompts and Merkel herself suggesting that they do so. I think we're going to see it just here. Angela Merkel was trying to shake his hand, he wasn't having any of it. Now, of course, with Trump back in office, his vice president, we've talked about it here in the studio, his vice president, J.D. Vance, gave Europeans a sense of what is to come. Vance told the Munich Security Conference this month that European efforts to fight disinformation and hate speech were basically censorship. Let's take a listen.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
Now, Vance made that speech right in the middle of the election campaign. In response, the CDU's Friedrich Merz told DW at the Munich Security Conference that Vance's comments were clear election interference.
Today is a really historic day. The American security guarantees are being called into question. The Americans are questioning democratic institutions, and they are interfering quite openly in an election, including in relation to democratic parties and their majorities. And I have to say it disturbs me. It doesn't surprise me because they have talked about this before, but I firmly reject it. It is not the job of the American government to explain to us here in Germany how we should protect democratic institutions, and we will continue on our course.
So a clear rejection there from the CDU's Friedrich Merz. Richard, you were saying you were at the Munich Security Conference. I mean, the speed at which the old order here is changing is breathtaking. What changed in that moment when you heard J.D. Vance speaking?
Well, the thing, I mean, in that moment, Germans and I think other Europeans in Munich started to think, oh my goodness, are we kind of entering a sort of political and cultural kind of war with the Americans? You know, the Americans sort of declaring war on our mode of democracy. But that speech was just part of a series of comments from Trump himself, from his Secretary of Defense, you know, Donald Trump referring to Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine as a dictator. This sense that well, all of these kind of things taken together started to contribute to this sense here in Germany, and I think in other parts of Europe too, that the very kind of the foundations of the NATO alliance, of the Western alliance, could be in a process of crumbling. And Friedrich Merz has been saying this. He's been saying in recent interviews that that we can no longer be sure that NATO can count on Donald Trump honouring Article 5. This is big stuff, and this is one reason why this election is really very important.
I think we've reached that time, haven't we? It is 6 p.m. Berlin time, and I think, Jared, you've got some information for us.
We've got about 20 seconds to go, Anya, before 6 p.m. We're going to get the first exit polls now after weeks of intense debate and campaigning. The moment we've all really been waiting for is upon us in 10 seconds, the first insights into how tens of millions of Germans have voted today and what their directions are for the country's political future. And with that, it's 6 o'clock here in Germany. That means polls have closed, and I can tell you that according to the exit polls, the CDU-CSU Conservative bloc has reached 29%. That's up 4.9% from the last election. The far-right Alternative for Germany, 19.5%. That's an increase of 9.1% from the last election. The Social Democrats of the incumbent Chancellor Olaf Scholz, 16%. That's down 9.7% from the last election. The Greens, 13.5%. That's minus 1.2% from the 2021 election. The Left Party, 8.5%. That's up 3.6% from the last election. The Free Democrats, 4.9%. That's minus 6.5%. The Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance, a new party that's about a year old, on 4.7%, and other parties 3.9%. So as expected, the CDU-CSU Conservative bloc coming first, followed by the far-right Alternative for Germany, then the Social Democrats and the Greens. These are exit poll numbers. We will be getting more projections later on through the evening, so that does mean that these figures may change as the evening develops, but these are the initial exit poll results.
All right, so we see that the CDU is the strongest. We're going to look at the distribution of seats here. So the SPD has 116, the CDU-CSU 211, the Greens 98, the AfD, Alternative for Germany, 142, the left, Die Linke, 62, and SSW just 1. So if we look at the possible coalitions here, because obviously this will now be heading towards another coalition government, one coalition looks likely. The SPD and the CDU-CSU, they have enough seats projected to form a coalition without having to rely on the Green Party. So that is one coalition that we may be heading to. We're going to cross now to the CDU headquarters to get more from DW's chief political editor, Michaela Küffner, who is standing by at the CDU headquarters, where I presume the atmosphere is fairly positive. Michaela, how are these exit poll numbers being received there among the Conservatives?
Well, there were instant celebrations, but nobody was ecstatic because currently these first initial exit polls, and it's very early days, are just below that psychologically important threshold of the 30% mark. That's where the Conservative CDU-CSU has been polling in the polls really for months leading up to these elections. And Friedrich Merz did take a risk in Parliament. He did accept votes from the far-right Alternative for Germany, who, as it looks like, have almost potentially doubled their percentage share from just about 10% to just under 20% here. And that is something where he will be seen as responsible. So yes, they know they're in the lead, as expected. They know that they're very likely to have Friedrich Merz as the next Chancellor of Germany. That's a huge win, but there's no wow factor as yet. It's not above 30%, and there's a slight sigh of relief that a two-party coalition at these very early hours and minutes seems to be within reach, because that's what nobody here wants, is a complex negotiation that would involve two more partners.
Absolutely. Do you get the impression that the Germans have given Merz a strong mandate? I mean, 29%, up almost 5% since the last election, but is he going to go into this in a strong position?
Yes, but there's two factors to this. First of all, the CDU-CSU managed to pick up almost 5 percentage points. That is a big, significant win. But let's just remember that these are early, these are snap elections, and they emanate from the spectacular failure of a three-way coalition. So it is the weakness of Olaf Scholz, the current Chancellor, and his ability to hold a three-way coalition together. It's also the weakness of the Social Democrats, who have suffered a clear defeat here today.
All right, Michaela Küffner, we're going to have to leave it there at the CDU headquarters. We will be back with you again, no doubt, later on in the evening. Michaela, thank you so much. This is Alice Weidel from the AfD speaking.
It was a fantastic election campaign. We did really well. And as we've seen in the exit polls, what we've seen is that we are the only party who have doubled our position over the last election. Double. They wanted to cut our numbers in half, but the opposite is what has occurred. And one thing is for sure, we will always have an open hand to get involved in a coalition in the German government. The will of Germany is something we will implement. We are always prepared to fulfill the will of the people in a German government. It remains to be seen what will happen in the next few weeks. But friends, if what we predicted occurs, that the CDU carries out election fraud on the AfD by copying our program and then entering into a coalition with the left wing, then there'll be new elections faster than you can imagine, and we will overtake the CDU, and that is our aim. Friends, once again, thank you to all of you who are unable to be here this evening, who went out to campaign for us tirelessly, no matter how cold it was, standing on the streets, at the stands, carrying out election campaigning for all of us. Thank you to all of our tireless election campaigners. You were super. You were so strong. It was fantastic. And Timo, thank you to you as well for all your support. Fantastic. And I would now like to give the floor to you. Thank you for your support.
And that was Alice Weidel from the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, speaking about their election results, sounding very upbeat and positive. We're going to get more from our political correspondent who's at the AfD party headquarters, Matthew Moore. Matthew, a strong result for the far right, as expected. So 19.5% is what the exit poll is showing. How are people reacting there?
I have to say, it's a strange one tonight for the AfD because it's a historic result. They've almost doubled what they got last time, but it was a sense of disappointment as that number was read out in the room. I was here the last time they performed in a national election, and it was much louder. I was expecting scenes of jubilation, of screaming, but there was nothing like that. There was disappointment because they fell under that 20%. They've been polling really solidly on 20%, 21% in some polls, and to come under 20% level is a sense that they were really hoping to be above that. And so, although they're saying that it's a great result and they wanted to half our result, we just heard from Alice Weidel saying that it's a strange atmosphere now because they didn't get above the 20%, and there's a sense that the air has just kind of left the balloon. It's a strange one, Anya.
Yeah. However, a lot of people did vote for the AfD. So just remind us what's behind this support for the Alternative for Germany.
Of course, you're right. It's a historic result, and 1 in 5 voters, it looks like, did put their cross next to the AfD. So, of course, they're really delighted. But it's interesting. Just that the initial response was a very muted one. I'll tell you the reasons that many people turned to the AfD is because, as we've heard throughout the night and throughout recent months, there's a sense of real frustration out there among the German public about the economy, about the energy crisis. Their bills are going up. People are feeling that pinch in their everyday lives. And the Alternative for Germany is offering solutions to that. Some of them very radical. Buying gas from Russia. They're now chanting behind me, AfD. And there's a sense that they are confident they're offering something else to the voters. And make no mistake, it is a huge result for them because they're now 1 in 5 voters is voting for them. That means they will have a big voice in the Bundestag. They will probably be the main party of opposition. They are the second biggest force. That means way more exposure. It also means normalisation, really important for this party. And the other thing is that it also means a lot of money that they can then pour into marketing and establishing and professionalising themselves in the next 4 years until the next election. And that's what they've got their eye on, is 2029. That's when they hope, as we heard tonight, Alice Weidel said it again, our hand continues to be outstretched. We're willing to take part in government. We're ready. We want to implement the will of the German people. Now, they won't be in the next government, but that's the plan. Their whole aim is to be in the government in 2029, Anya.
So a real sense of momentum there, Matthew. Obviously, I do have to ask, though, I mean, are some people voting for the AfD out of protest because of the issues, because of the rising prices, because their heating bills have gone up? I mean, is this a protest vote to a certain extent?
That's certainly Look, I've been covering this party in recent months. There's been lots of elections last year around Germany, and there were those that felt that they were just fed up with the previous government. It was a three-party government. It was really kind of marked by infighting over months, if not years. And so people were just fed up with it, and they felt that the only party that really reflected their anger, their frustration, in a meaningful way to them was the Alternative for Germany. And so we did hear in recent weeks and months people saying they're just going to vote for them because they wanted to send a signal. And that is the signal that we have just seen tonight. The second biggest force in the German parliament is a far-right party for the first time since World War II.
I wanted to ask you about Alice Weidel herself, Matthew. We were just seeing footage there of her. She presents herself as more moderate compared to other AfD figures. Do you think that strategy has helped the party attract a broader base?
Absolutely. I think that Alice Weidel is the kind of the professional face of the party. This is a very male-dominated party, a party that has strong links to the far right, a party that is being watched by security services in this country because it's seen as potential